Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan from startups.com, joined as always by my friend, the founder and the CEO of startups.com, Wil Schroter. Wil, there's this sense that it's my startup and I'll cry if I want to, or I'll win if I want to, but it's mine, right? And I control the destiny and it's mine, right? It's this thing that's mine. And yet, so often we see, particularly on the VC route, that as you climb and climb and climb through fundraise after fundraise after fundraise, that at some point you're squeezed so far down in the cap table that it can look like there's very, very little upside left for you as the founder. How the hell do we get here?
Oh, look, it happens all the time.
Right?
And if you're listening, if you've raised, it's probably already happened to you.
Yeah.
So this isn't a one-off. Typically, though, we don't really know what's happening to everybody else in these capital raises.
Sure.
We don't get to see everybody else's cap table. So in our minds, we're probably getting a super shitty deal. And by the way, we probably are, but maybe everybody else is getting a better deal.
Yeah.
The only real look you can get, if you're really curious as to how these things end, is when you look at the filings of companies about to go public and you look how much the executives own.
Sure.
Right? It's almost always single digits. Now, in good times, like the last few years have been particularly good, valuations are high. So startups tend to get, or founders tend to get, a better lot. But in most times, the average founder, by the time they hit IPO stage, and again, I'm trying to play this all the way up, is in the single digits. Now, and that's if you get to IPO, which means you had a really successful company, which
Yep.
usually implies, right, that you had better rounds. Now let's talk about the rest of us, the mere mortals who won't ever hit that stage. We are 2 years in. We've done friends and family. We've done co-founder rounds, so to speak. We've done the seed round, and we're already at 12%.
Yep.
And we're like, okay, I haven't even really raised a lot of money yet. If we take on more Series A, what have you, let's see if we can even get it. I'm going to be pretty far down the stack. Ryan, that's one scenario. The other scenario is all those things have already happened. I've already raised my cash, whatever. I've got X amount of percentage. I'm behind all of these other preferences of all the other people that invested. And the company's just doing okay. If I work here 10 more years, I won't have any more upside. Like this is as good as it gets.
Yep.
And I've got what I've got, right? What do I do about that? I'm the founder. How the hell do I get out of this situation? And we'll talk about that as well.
Yeah. So let's start, man. So what is this really? What do we call this?
We call it being screwed.
Yeah.
No. We look at it and we say, at this point, I've got to be very mindful that I have a shit deal.
Yep.
Here's the problem.
It's the reality, though, right? I mean, that is the reality. And but I want to be careful here because you and I talked about this a bit over the last few weeks, and again pre-show today. We're not saying you did something wrong and now you've landed in shit deal. This is sort of the way it goes, right? This isn't a series of mistakes or things that you could have done differently. It's a shitty deal because that's the nature of this type of deal, right?
Here's where I see it a lot. I see it a lot with folks that have raised quite a bit of cash, and people don't see this from the outside. So I'll give you the insider's perspective. I've got a good friend of mine comes to me. He's been in business for about 8 or 9 years. He's raised about $20 to $30 million. And he said, look, I've got a handful of points left in the cap table. We had some down rounds, we had some bridge loans, et cetera. Yep. But I'm 10 years in, 8 to 10 years in, and I'm long since through all of my personal capital. So that's gone. Right. I get an okay salary, but we've never done so well that I could get it extraordinary. And that's not going to happen anytime soon. And the company's doing okay. It's not terrible, but it's not really going to be exponential. But I'm tethered to this thing. Everyone else can quit. I'm tethered to this thing, at least in my mind, for the next 5 to 10 years. I'm screwed.
Let's hold on a point here for just a second, Will, because I think this is important. Because the company's just doing well enough, but it's not in a position where it can now continue on an exponential path. This is a problem, right? This isn't a problem for a lot of companies, right? For companies that didn't take on capital, that didn't squeeze the owner down, it's okay, right? What's the pejorative term we use for them now? Lifestyle businesses, as if that isn't what we're all trying to build, right? But so you can't have that, right? If you've gone the capital raising route and you are now squeezed way down on the cap table, there's no version of just having a good and stable company that's going to leave you with any type of real upside as a founder, right?
Right. And that's the thing. Ryan, we've got startups.com. We're a privately held company. We didn't raise money. We could do whatever we want. We take distributions. We can do all the things that companies can do. So for us, we determine our own fate.
Yes.
Once we take on money, and a lot of people don't realize this until they've done it, those options usually go off the table.
Correct.
And that's a lot of what we're talking about. If you own 10% of the company, but you're taking big fat distributions every year, getting your big salary or whatever, it may feel like less of a shit deal.
Yep.
But if you're forced into a below market salary with no ability to have cash upside and no real visibility as to whether your equity is ever going to transfer, and even if it does, you're probably so backed up in the cap table that by the time that money would make it to you, you'd have to have such an exponential outcome. And unfortunately, you know exactly what your chances are because you're the closest to it there, right? You can pretend to be optimistic, but late at night when you're staring at the ceiling, you're like, this is never going to fucking happen.
Yeah. When it's become fairly obvious that growth curve can be steady and stable, but not rocket ship, this takes a lot of motivation out, right? The wind kind of comes out of the sails at that point because you now know, right? The probability of us ever re-achieving that growth curve, or if we ever had it to begin with, is relatively low. And the likelihood of any other type of big outcome is extremely small. And you don't have the ability to do all the things we just talked about, like distributions or profit share, whatever it is that would give you some internal upside. What is there, right? And this is where it gets really, really emotionally tough for founders.
Yeah, I think that a big part of it is, again, we feel alone in this.
For sure.
You know, as we're thinking about it, we've got these really tough emotions. One emotion is, I don't deserve to feel this way. I created this situation.
Yeah. Yep.
And so if it's a shitty situation, then I have to deal with it. Like I have to own it, et cetera. And I'm not taking accountability off the table here. Okay. Because yes, it is your situation. Yes, you created it, but it doesn't mean you are tethered to it. Like you're the captain that has to go to the bottom of the ocean while everybody else floats off in life rafts.
Right.
That's not what that means. And guess what, Ryan? Every founder that I talk to about this has no idea that they have any other option. They just assume that they're all forever shackled and the outcome of the boat is their outcome. If the Titanic's going down, they're going down. And they don't even realize, they've forgotten that they have options.
If you were to ask me what the most powerful force in all of startup land is, it's inertia. Right? It's once we start doing something, we just assume that we forever have to keep doing that same thing. We have to stay that course.
Absolutely.
And it happens in a lot of different scenarios, but this is one of those, I think, because of the complexity and because of what's at stake. I mean, we're literally talking about the company and the value that it represents to you. This feels pretty important, right? Like this isn't something we're just like, well, maybe I'll just walk away. So of course that's not going to be your first instinct. But it is a possibility, right? And I think that we forget that we do have some options here and that we're not necessarily inextricably tied to this thing. Of course we aren't, and we know that. And yet we don't see an alternative that feels even remotely close to just continue to suffer through it with a little upside. So we'll do that. So what should we be doing instead? Like what is the outcome here?
Sure. So, the way we talk about it, and Ryan, when you and I talk to founders, is we first remind them that you still require incentive.
Yep.
And so we talk about this sometimes in some of the podcasts, but let me just remind folks of this component. There are two factors to how you're engaged in the company. As an owner, that's where the stock comes in, a lot of what we're complaining about right now, and as an employee.
Yep.
The two are not inextricably linked. People forget this. In fact, most founders don't even know this. They assume, well, I'm an owner, so of course I have to work there.
Yeah.
And again, this is more about there are two separate roles. If you decide that you don't want to work there and you quit today, chances are, other than how your vesting works, you still have your stock, just like your investors do, right? Just like your team does. If you decide that you're going to go work somewhere else, you'll get a salary somewhere else, right? You'll get paid separately. You'll have incentives somewhere else. At which point you work at this company, but you have no incentive. You just have a shitty job.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. And I don't think people think in those terms. They just assume, again, I started this thing. I'm tethered to this thing. This is my lot in life and I'm just screwed. You have to have incentive. And especially in this case, I'm talking about as it relates to investors. The investor's job is to make sure you stay incentivized. Here's what they do. They say, well, you have stock. You're incentivized. And There's some, truth to that argument.
Sure.
But there's another way to look at it is I had stock.
Yeah.
And I had to sell it all to try to create more value for everybody around me. Right. And now I don't have it. And with that, my incentive. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And it's so tough too. I mean, like that conversation with investors, we've seen this play out where it's like, yeah, I have stock in the company. So do you. You made a one-time investment that, by the way, is less than what my market salary would be for a single year. I've been doing this for 8 years. You still have the same position on the cap table, and yet I never see you show up here. Now, that wasn't part of the original deal, but it doesn't mean that it's not disincentivizing, right? Like when we look around, it's the same thing, right? When we look around and we see
function's the same.
What else is happening and sort of where we sit in all this, right? Like I now have the least upside. I have the most responsibility, and I'm tied to this in ways that nobody else is, right? Like you're talking about your friend who's now buried all of their personal capital in this as well. So it's like, if I stop this, I am worse off than I was 9 years ago when I started this, right? Not a great feeling after having invested what we invest as founders in this. So yeah, we have to have some forward-looking incentive. I think the moment the incentive becomes, I'm running from the fear of failure versus I'm running towards an outcome that I actually want to achieve, we've got a problem, right? And it's one that has to be addressed sooner than later. And I don't know what your experience with this, Will, but the founders I talk to, most of them are dealing with this way, way, way too late, right? They're at that point where they're or not at all, which I would throw in the way too late bucket. So they're just, you got to do something about this, and you got to do it at a point where you still have the energy and motivation to do something with that, right? If you're just running from the fear of failure and you just don't want to lose more than you've already lost, it doesn't end well, right? This is just not going to turn around in a way that's going to be positive for you as the founder.
Yeah, and so part of what I would say is there's no version, if we're waiting for someone else to do this for us, where that's going to happen. There's no version where someone pulls us aside and says, "Hey, Ryan, I just don't feel like you have enough incentive in the company. Here's some of my stock."
Wait. Are you literally
never going to happen?
Are you telling me that the founder fairy godmother is a myth, Will?
No, I mean, we keep assuming that it's going to come externally.
Yeah.
Right. Externally, it only goes one way: people taking things from you. Right. Externally, no one gives anything to you, other than cash, but then they take your equity, right? As they should. For the founder, we have to sit back. We have to have this moment of self-reflection, and we have to say, okay, here's where I'm at in life. Forget what happened up until now. But here is where I'm at. Right. I need to have these things in life. I need to be at this point. I need to be in a situation where either I can see a path to this, with my current job, or not. Yeah. And at some point, we just have to be honest with ourselves. Once we are, and we say, look, I can't keep going on running into debt nonstop and like basically running backward. Like most of the folks that I know that are in this position have been through the same gauntlet, which is they went 3 to 5 years of getting no pay at all. Used all of their personal savings, all of their assets, drained everything personally just to get to the point where they were getting funded, et cetera. Got funded, got a basic salary, which by then they were so thankful for, right? But again, they're 7-8 years plus into this. Not always, but usually. And they're like, damn, dude, like I lost so much money just to get to this point. And I actually don't have a magical, treasure chest of cash to replenish all this. So I want to build a house or buy a house rather, or my kids are going to college. Who knows by then, whatever the expenses are, I'm looking at it going, I actually can't afford to live. And that's not okay. That's not okay.
Not for what we put into these things.
Correct. There has to be a reckoning. There has to be a point where we go back to the board and say, as an employee, I need a new deal. That may include more incentive comp for stock, for cash, or whatever it is. And you have to be okay with that. Yeah. Here's why. And my friend who I mentioned earlier did exactly that. And we talked through it at length, and we put a plan together. We talked about how to approach the board, et cetera. And I said, let them know that you're not bitter, you're not angry, and you own the fact that you put yourself into the situation. You try to make the right decisions. But the situation also is what it is. Here's where you need to be in life, and here's where the company is falling short, like any other human, right? And you have to be willing to say, if we can't account for this, then I have to find another situation that will.
Yep.
That's a tough position to take, right?
Is.
Especially like when you made the commitment to all those folks. But what's important isn't so much, it's not a threat. It's you guys have to understand where I am with my life, my career, my family, if I have one, et cetera, and what I'm trying to get accomplished. Unless we are painfully clear about that fact, no one will paint that picture for us ever.
It's absolutely true. I would love to. I'm going to poll the audience now. Well, this probably isn't going to work very well, but I'm going to poll the audience right now. I'd like everybody to raise your hand if you knew that you could actually go and do this. Because I talk to founders all the time. They're like, wait, I can go back. I can talk to my board. I can talk to my investors. We can renegotiate. Yeah, you can. Is it fun? Is it a happy conversation that everybody's just willing to jump into with both feet? Typically not. But to your point, Will, sometimes we get to the point where it's the only way to move forward, right? We have to change tack. We have to change path in order to make this viable for us as well as them, right? If we just give up and fold, it doesn't benefit them either. So, not a great place to be in. The leverage that you have in this situation sucks. It's not fun to use, but you can do it. I'm listening now. I heard exactly, it sounds like 3 hands go up, Will, out of hundreds of thousands of people. So it doesn't sound like too many people knew you could do this. But yeah, great point.
Let's talk about how to do it.
Yep.
Just for what it's worth, because I think if folks are listening, they're like, okay, this sounds great. Please tell me exactly how to go about this.
Yeah.
And having coached some folks through it before, I'll give you just a quick hint. Here's the worst way. At the next board meeting, spring it on everybody and just say, hey, next slide, here it is.
Right. I'd like you to meet my replacement.
Yeah. Don't do that. That's actually the worst way to go about it.
It sounds like fun.
Here's how to go about it. Let's say on your typical board, let's say you've got 5 to 7 people. In almost every case, hopefully, you have one person who is most friendly to your cause.
Yes.
Right. Typically the person you inserted onto the board. If you have nobody that's friendly to your cause, I can already tell you how this conversation is going to end.
Step 1, I'm adding my mother to the board of directors. Step 2, we're going to talk about my replacement. Yeah.
First step, long before there's any board meeting or what have you, is you have to get in front of your friendly. You have to explain to them at a very personal level.
Yes.
Say like, this has nothing to do with the company. Company's fine. This is me at a personal level. Here's where I'm at from an energy standpoint, from a life standpoint, et cetera. I can't keep going like this. It's got nothing to do. I actually like what the company's doing, and I want to be a part of that. But I'm no longer in a position where it's actually working out for me anymore.
Yeah.
I've taken all like the freebies, if you will, where I pulled out of my savings. I've drained my retirement, whatever. It's all gone, man. Right?
Yeah.
Like I can't be totally leveraged. And typically the irony is all the people on the board, none of them are in that spot. Whenever the investor is like, well, we're on the same side of the table. It's like, dude, you flew here in a private jet. We're not on the same side of the table.
We're on the same side of the table now. How we got here was very different.
Yeah. It's like, come on. It's a ridiculous argument, a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
But first thing we want to do is we want to isolate our friendly, get them sympathetic to our cause. But most importantly, get them to help us tune up our approach and our story and our expectations.
Yeah.
So for example, let's say that we're in year 5. We're making $140,000, and compared to making $0,000 previously, that was all the money in the world.
Yeah.
But compared to what we think we can make in the market, maybe we could make $200,000 in the market. Just make it up a number. Doesn't matter. But because if you average over the last 5 or 6 years, we made 0 on all those years. We've averaged like $50,000 a year.
Yep.
Most of that all averaged on the high in the last 18 months, probably. So we're broke. And so we have to be able to kind of repaint that picture for our friendly, because they'll have forgotten or not cared or just didn't know.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's so important because, to your point, taking this time to kind of explain this from a very personal nature, those aren't updates they've been getting, right? They don't know your personal financial situation in all likelihood. They may or may not care, but they probably don't know, right? And so it's incumbent on us, again, communicate this stuff to them. Don't want to derail you. I like where we're going with this, but one quick question. In terms of the development of the friendly, I've seen this done multiple ways, but beyond the friendly, do you recommend going with individual conversations for the rest, or do you get the friendly on board and then you bring this to the board all at once? Again, I've seen founders do this both ways.
So
but
here are the next steps. Yeah. So the next step is for, if you have another friendly, obviously having 2 friendlies, always one-on-one conversations. Always live, never email conversations, never want to go that way, because reading the response is the conversation. So if, again,
for the audience, live doesn't mean Slack either, right? Live doesn't mean SMS, right? Email, talk to the people.
This is the epitome of a human conversation.
Yes.
Even if it's hard to bring up or hard to have, you've got to have it in person.
Especially because it's hard to have, right? You have to have it in person.
It'll fail otherwise.
Yes.
Once we get our first friendly, that is now our ambassador for the rest of this process.
Yep.
So if we go to each person individually, maybe we have a good relationship with each person, we can do that. Chances are probably not, right? There's a couple people who we're good with, and the rest it could go either way, but aren't necessarily going out of our way to help us. The friendly then becomes, this board member then becomes the person who's helping us sell this to everybody else.
Yep.
Right. So the next most important thing is to have more than one board member, so that the focus at this point is getting the second board member on board with this approach.
Sure.
And really what we're saying is we're not really sure maybe what the comp plan is going to be yet, but more than one of us on the board believes that we need to take care of you. Right? That your incentive structure is broken. We don't want to lose you. And so we're listening. Once we have two people, it's not a lock, but I rarely see it go the other direction.
Sure.
And so at that point, once we've got two people, by the time we get to the board meeting, we should have talked to everybody before the board meeting. This is politics 101,
yep.
Right? You never want to wonder what's going to happen in the board meeting. You should have figured that out long before the board
Don't
meeting.
ask the question that you don't know the answer to, or at least the vector that it's going to be answered in, right?
Exactly. So the board meeting should make it more official if that's where it needs to happen. And again, this may happen between a board meeting. But ultimately, what you want to find out is if you have a spectrum, right? It wouldn't be exactly 5 depending on co-founders, but let's say you've got 5 board members that aren't you and your co-founders. You want your friendly, then one other person. Then, of course, you've got 3 other people that you've got to convince. There's always your friendly on one end of the scale and a complete asshole on the other end of the scale.
Yeah.
And really all of this is just working your way up to that boss level.
Yeah.
Right. Until you get to your, into this, the one person that's clearly not going to be on board. And really what we're doing is we're building a case among enough people that say that this has to get done.
Yeah.
The more people that we win over, the more of a foregone conclusion that we can do this at all.
Yep. If you got the prevailing wind in your favor, 1 or 2 standing against it isn't going to matter that much.
Here's what's most important about the first person and certainly the second person. They'll let you know what the temperature of the organization is, of the board is about something like this. Basically, if in your mind, you're like, well, hey, I was making $140, but I could go to McKinsey and make $350. So you should pay me $350. And they're like, you're out of your mind. Like you've never gotten a job offer like that. Number 2, you're 26 years old. What makes you think you could possibly get that? Like they'll bring you back down to earth.
Being 26 is exactly what makes me think that, right?
Yeah.
Not knowing any better.
But again, the idea being, we need to talk to somebody outside of our own head to find out whether we're even on the same plane.
Sure.
The other side of it is they could look at it and go, honestly, like you're right. Everything you're saying is correct. You should be paid more. You're worth more. You're all these things. And I don't know how we're going to do that. Right. Again, you're looking for that external validation to see if you're exactly, this is even possible.
Sure. Yeah, you gotta open the door for possibilities. I like the way you structured that. I think it is important to know that you don't have to come with all the answers, but you have to bring the conversation to the table, right? 100%. There is no upside in continuing to run with no upside, right? There's just nothing is going to come of that, right? And so you have to do this, right? And so you don't have to have all the answers, right? I don't think anybody's going to expect that. You got to come with some level of a framework around what you think needs to happen, at least being able to clearly articulate what the pain points within it are for you so that you know what has to get fixed, maybe not how, but what. And then you're on good footing to move forward with a meeting and with conversations that I think you can find yourself in a better position. Or if not, at least you know where you stand, and then you kind of have the bigger, harder, scarier decision in front of you, which is, do I continue to do this at all? Right?
Okay, so stick with that. So I've also got some scenarios where that is the answer, where the board comes back and they said it. By the way, it was never as contentious as we thought it would be. Right? Again, sometimes the answer is no, but it's not necessarily like this intense argument.
Oh, come on. There's nobody like pounding their fist on the other end of the table. Like, you got to stick with this. We put our money in. I put my kids' college savings into this. Yeah.
Right.
That doesn't look like that.
I mean, it can. But
so
usually
much more fun.
What I find is a certain amount of sympathy for the founder's plight. But here's the big difference. If we rely on sympathy as a whole, hey, I haven't made enough money, I have to do this, etc., the probability of success is pretty low.
Sure.
Instead, we have to rely on consequence. Everyone responds to consequence.
Oh, yes.
Here is what will happen if this doesn't happen.
Yep.
So here's how we approach that, right? It's never a threat, right? It's not even appropriate. What it is it's a workaround.
Yep.
Right? It says, look, if we can't make this happen, my goals still need to be met. The answer to this won't be my goals don't matter. That's actually not even a discussion. My goals matter, right? And you have to be resolute. The answer will be, here's how we'll try to move forward without me.
Yep.
Right? Saying I'll quit and go fuck yourself, figure it out is not the right answer. Right? That's a threat, right?
Yep. Works well at a fast food job. Very, very rarely anywhere else.
A resolution is, look, if we can't make this happen, here's what I think it would take to replace me, and here's how long I think it would take to find the candidate that could do that.
Yep.
Right. And I'll move to usually the chairman role. That's how they put CEOs out to pasture. And from there, we'll operate the company accordingly. Right. You have to remind people that you are not an indentured servant.
Yeah.
If I leave, let's find someone else because I still have equity. I'm on the same side of the table you are, but I'm not an indentured servant. I don't have to work here for shit pay.
Yep.
Right? It's not the way this works.
Yep.
And by the way, you're an investor too. You don't have to work here at all.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure your equity and mine are the same, right?
Yeah.
And so if we go into this without addressing consequence, the consequence is I leave, we'll have to find someone else. And if we don't take care of this and realign incentives, there will be a problem.
Yeah.
If there's no problem, if the problem is just my feelings are hurt and we're relying on sympathy, the probability of that it's super low.
Yeah. You'll get paid in empathy.
Yeah. With our friendly and ideally kind of, our backup friendly, if you will, we've got to be able to develop that pitch, to be able to develop that proposal to say, if this doesn't happen, no hard feelings, but here's what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And I've yet to see someone propose this is what's going to happen and come back without a job, right? It's very rare unless they really did it wrong.
Yeah. You're saying that like everybody just decides, let's shutter it. That feels like a better outcome. Yeah, rarely the case. And it's not just, okay, that can happen, but I think that's the scenario where there's a lot of other things going wrong in the business and it's on a downward trajectory. I think what we're talking about is the business is relatively fine, right? It's just no longer fine for you, right? Your upside is now limited. And so, I don't think I've ever seen that happen either. Well, the thing I will say, be prepared for some potential hypocrisy here, because I've seen founders get caught off guard by this, where it's like, all right, so we're going to need to go and find somebody else who can do this job, for what we're paying me, and I will cease to get paid and I will just have equity like the rest of you. And they're like, there's no way we could find somebody to do what you do for what we're paying you. Bingo, gotcha.
Right.
But I've seen founders get caught off guard by this, right? They're like, and I didn't know what to say. I'm like, well, what were you thinking? I was thinking, well, that's a bunch of shit, man. If you expect me to, like, yes, that's exactly it, right? But so be prepared for that, right? Be willing to accept that there may be some pushback, and this is often a way where I've seen this play out a couple different ways. But one, the person still, did step aside. They hired somebody else. They put them in place. At the same salary, right? Or maybe a higher salary, or they just decided to raise the founder's compensation, knowing that they were likely the best person they could find for that role, given all the historical context, given, all of the time and effort they'd put in, and that trying to find somebody else to do that for same or a little more or whatever was going to be more fraught with risk than simply right sizing them. And so, this is often how we get to that outcome that we want. Again, not a great and lovely piece of leverage to have to wield, but it's effective.
Yeah, exactly. There has to be some level of consequence. And it doesn't have to be a threat.
No.
It has to be just, if we don't do this, here's what I would propose next.
Yeah.
And again, it's bringing somebody else in, maybe bringing somebody up from within the current team to kind of run things, et cetera.
Yeah. It's not a threat. It's just the reality of the situation.
Correct. And we have to be very clear about why this is happening, right? Again, if we come across like we just sound like we're childish about it, like we didn't get our way, it's not going to work, right?
Either let me play with the clown, or I'm taking all my toys and I'm going home, right? Like,
dude, I'm fried, I'm broke, and I'm at a stage in my life where I can't bet 5 to 10 years on, past comp. It just doesn't work that way. I'm not in a position where I can do that. More often than not, there will be some concession to be had. There, like anything else in life, there are 0 concessions on what you don't ask for. And in some cases, what I've seen happen is the board says straight up no.
Yeah.
At that moment, instead of sitting around saying, oh, well, maybe this will work itself out later, you know exactly where you stand.
Yep.
And if you decide to stick around with that, so be it. But the illusions are gone.
Yeah.
At that point, this is what it is. And you got to take that deal or not, and we're going to find a new job, which again, you can certainly do.
Yes, you can. Yeah. Yeah. Again, like you said, we're not indentured servants. We're not tied to this thing through anything other than our own emotions. And so we got to start to decide what is best for us as founders. And I think we've laid it out pretty clearly today, that you find yourself in this position where there's no upside to run towards, and you're just running away from failure, or even just running on the treadmill that isn't benefiting you in any way, isn't elevating you, isn't changing your life circumstances for the positive. That's the time where we really have to start to think about what we're doing with ourselves and take some of these steps and try to course correct. Yeah. Yeah.
And look, there is no nobility in running yourself into the ground. There is no nobility in running yourself into the ground.
Say it one more time for the people in the back, Will.
I'm telling you, we all believe that, we're less of a founder if we don't run ourselves into the ground and drain ourselves of our cash and our everything in life. Yes. Like every life force we could possibly have. There's nothing noble about that, right? It may sound noble. It's actually a terrible decision. And it's a reflection of us not standing up for what we deserve and fighting for it, which is what this always comes down to.